Cedric Bennett was folding his grandson's school uniforms at the dining table when the heavy thud came from upstairs, a suitcase hitting the bedroom floor hard enough to send a dull tremor through the old Victorian house in Springfield, Illinois. He paused with a pressed white shirt in his hands and listened. The clock in the front room ticked. The furnace sighed and clicked. No other sounds followed, but after 67 years, Cedric trusted the alarms that lived in his bones. He set the shirt on the neat stack, wiped his palms on his trousers, and started up the staircase that bent halfway and turned again, careful on the creaking step he always warned Mason about. Craig's door was wide open. Clothes were everywhere. Shirts pulled off hangers, jeans yanked from drawers, socks thrown like small rolled fists across the rug. Craig stood over the open suitcase on the bed, grabbing what he could without folding it, moving with the tense, jerky rhythm of a man trying not to think. His work laptop, a dull gray rectangle, glowed from the unmade bedspread, tabs blooming across the screen. Cedric said, "Going somewhere?" The words sounded too soft in the messy room. Craig did not look up. "Business trip, last-minute thing." Cedric kept his voice even. A business trip for tech support? He knew the schedule of his son's life as well as he knew the stains on this carpet. The company kept Craig local. They barely sent him downtown unless a customer insisted. Craig stuffed toiletries into a side pocket, knocking over the framed photo of Linda holding newborn Mason. The frame slid and the glass cracked when it kissed the hardwood, a quick, bright sound that felt like a cut. Years ago, when grief was fresh and heavy, Craig used to touch that frame before bed, 2 fingers to his lips and then to Linda's picture. Now he stepped over it the way a person steps over fallen leaves. Cedric felt something old and sore move behind his ribs. "For how long?" he asked. "Not sure yet." Craig zipped a jacket into the suitcase without seeing if it fit. Cedric took one step closer, not blocking the door, not grabbing his son, just putting his weight in the room like an anchor. "Talk to me, son. What's really happening?" Craig met his father's eyes, and Cedric searched for the boy he'd raised, the man he had forgiven too many times. He saw no guilt and no shame, just a flat, steady look, and underneath it, a strange relief, as if a knot had been untied. "I'm leaving, Dad," Craig said. "I should have done this years ago." The words were calm, almost gentle, but they landed like a dropped box of plates. Cedric felt the house shift around him, every picture and nail adjusting to a new tilt. "What about your boy?" he asked. "Mason needs you." Craig shrugged like a man shedding a coat. "He's better off with you. He always has been." He yanked the zipper closed. The sound cut the air and seemed to run down the stairs. Cedric imagined it reaching the first floor, the old desk, the algebra book, the boy who did not complain, who stacked his pencils and washed his breakfast dishes without being asked. "You can't just walk out," Cedric said. He tried to keep anger out of his voice. Anger was heat and he needed clear air. "Whatever this is, we face it together." Craig lifted the suitcase, swung it off the bed, and slung the strap over his shoulder. "There is no together," he said in a flat voice. "There's you and Mason playing house while I pay the bills. Well, now you can figure out the bills too." Cedric felt that like cold water down his back. What does that mean? But Craig had already stepped past him into the hallway. Cedric reached out and caught his sleeve, not hard, just to slow him, to buy one more sentence. Craig shook free like Cedric's hand was fire. "Don't," he said. "Please." Cedric let go. He followed his son down the stairs, his slippers finding the worn runner, his eyes catching on details he had dusted and polished for years. The banister nicked in 2 places, the small dent on the wall at knee level from the time a tricycle turned too fast. In the living room, Mason sat at the antique desk that had belonged to Cedric's mother, shoulders squared, pencil moving across a worksheet. He looked up when they entered. His eyes were Craig's shape, but Linda's quiet. "Going somewhere, Dad?" he asked. Craig paused by the front door. For a heartbeat, something uncertain flickered across his face. "I need some time away, buddy. Grandpa will take care of you." Mason's pencil did not drop. "For how long?" "I don't know yet." Mason nodded once, as if he were filing the answer in a drawer. No tears, no begging, no offering deals to make the moment different. Cedric felt pride and sorrow at the same time. The boy's calm was not a child's calm. Craig opened the door. October air slid into the warm house and lifted a paper on the hallway table. "I'll call when I'm settled," he said. "Where are you going?" Cedric asked. "Somewhere I can breathe again." The door closed with a polite click that sounded louder than a slam. Through the window, Cedric watched the silver Honda back out, pause, and then pull away. The taillights winked at the stop sign, then were gone. The grandfather clock ticked. The furnace hummed and settled. A neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Cedric stood still until he remembered to breathe. Mason set his pencil down and folded his hands. "Is he coming back?" the boy asked. Cedric wanted to lie. He wanted to say yes and give the boy one more night of sleep. But the truth had already moved into the house and taken a chair. "I don't think so, champ." Mason looked down at his paper, then closed his algebra book and stacked it on top of his other textbooks with careful precision. He turned in his chair to face Cedric, and the expression on his young face was one Cedric had never seen before, not even on adults who pretended better than they felt. It was calm, centered, almost professional. "Grandpa, don't worry," Mason said. "I'll handle this." Cedric almost smiled at the bravery in the small voice, then stopped because Mason did not sound brave. He sounded sure. "Handle what?" Cedric asked, not unkindly, not mocking. He needed to know what the boy thought the problem was, because the problem had too many heads: money, trust, custody, the shape of tomorrow. "First, I need to check our bank accounts," Mason said, already standing, already sliding his books into his backpack. "Then we'll know exactly what we're dealing with." Cedric blinked, not because he hadn't thought of money, but because hearing it from a 13-year-old made the floor tilt again. "Mason," he began, but the boy was already moving with a quiet, steady purpose, past the couch, past the shelf with the family photos, up the stairs to the small room where he did homework and built models, and kept the laptop he had saved for by mowing lawns and fixing neighbors' Wi-Fi. Cedric stayed in the living room for a long moment. He picked up the fallen paper from the hallway table and put it back under the ceramic bowl that held keys and spare change. He crossed to the mantel and stared at the family photographs. A picnic at Washington Park, Mason's first day of kindergarten, Craig in a suit beside a bride who laughed with her eyes, a small urn with Linda's name beside a white rose that would not dry the way Cedric wanted it to. He climbed the stairs and stepped into Craig's room. He crouched and lifted the fallen frame. A slender crack ran from one corner to the other like a thin river on a map. He ran his thumb along the edge of the glass, then set the picture upright again, and, without thinking, kissed his fingertips and touched Linda's smile the way Craig used to do. In the hallway, a soft clicking sound began, steady and quick, like rain at a window. Cedric realized it was keys on a keyboard, a rhythm too focused for a child who had just seen his father leave. He stood in the doorway of Mason's room and watched the boy's back as the screen's light painted the neat desk, the stacked notebooks, the pencil cups arranged by height. "It's late for banking," Cedric said gently. "I know," Mason answered without turning. "But it's the right time to start." Cedric exhaled and leaned against the door frame. The house felt different now, lighter somehow and also heavier, as if secrets had gotten up and started walking around where people could see them. He did not know what exactly his grandson planned to handle, or how, or what it would cost. He only knew that the mystery didn't feel like fear anymore. It felt like a path with footprints he could follow, one careful step at a time. Cedric lay awake until the house went quiet enough to hear the wind press against the old windows, and when the soft, steady clicking of keys began from the end of the hall, he slid from bed, put on his robe, and followed the thin band of light under Mason's door like a trail. He knocked with 2 knuckles so he would not startle the boy. Mason said, "Come in, Grandpa," in a voice that was calm and awake. Cedric opened the door and paused on the threshold because the scene did not look like a child's late night. It looked like a small office. The desk lamp washed the room in warm light. Notebooks were stacked in neat piles. A cheap printer sat beside the laptop and fed out a page with a small hum. The laptop screen held 4 windows side by side, a bank portal, an email inbox, a credit report site, and a spreadsheet that Mason had built with names in one column and numbers in the next. Cedric stepped in and closed the door softly behind him. "It's past midnight," he said, keeping his voice even. "I know," Mason answered without looking up, fingers moving, eyes scanning. Midnight is when some systems are quieter and some reports update. He finished a note, saved it, and finally turned his chair, not nervous, not guilty, just focused like a boy who had decided to fix a broken thing. "Sit, please," he said. Cedric sat on the edge of the bed and rested his hands on his knees. "Tell me what you're doing." Mason reached for a manila folder already prepared. He slid out a printed bank statement and handed it over. Cedric saw his own name at the top and the small balance at the bottom, $12. He blinked once, then twice, because sometimes numbers make sense on the second try, but the number did not change. "There should be more than this," he said, and the words felt old and thin. "There was more," Mason said gently. "I went back 90 days, then 6 months. The withdrawals started small and regular, like autopay, then grew larger and closer together. 3 weeks ago, there was a transfer that emptied the savings." Cedric looked up. "To where?" Mason tapped the spreadsheet, traced a line with his finger. "First to Dad's checking, which he has online access to from this laptop." He nodded at an image of Craig's bank profile on the screen. "Then to a new account at a different bank under his name and a secondary user." Cedric tried to find a place for secondary user in his ideas about family and money, but the phrase did not sit anywhere soft. "Who is the secondary user?" he asked. Mason clicked into an email window, scrolled, and stopped on a message thread labeled Meridian Financial Services. He enlarged a photo from a social page. "Her name is Vanessa Torres," he said. "She works at Meridian downtown. She and Dad have been writing each other for months using a private email address and sometimes his work address too. She sent him instructions on how to move money so it looks like it is going to investments when it is actually going to a holding account. They also talk about apartments in other cities and about names they could use if they leave." Cedric felt a tightness in his chest that did not come from stares or age. He looked at the face on the screen, a young woman smiling at a lake. "How did you get into your father's email?" he asked. Mason did not flinch. "He uses the same password everywhere," he said. "It is Linda 2010, the year they got married. He leaves reminders and notes on his phone too. I tried it on his mail and on one of the banking portals, and it worked. This is not hard for people who want to steal or for people who want to stop them." Cedric drew a slow breath and set the fact aside because the question of whether this was right or wrong could not be settled tonight when the roof of his life was already open to the dark. "Show me the college fund," he said. Mason pulled another statement from the folder and placed it gently in Cedric's hand, like something fragile and dangerous at once. The first line showed last quarter's balance, $43,000. The last line showed $0. "It was a locked education account," Cedric said, trying to attach old rules to a new hole. "Locked if you do not know the login, and if you do not have a person at a bank who looks away," Mason answered. He spun the laptop, opened a tab, and brought up a chat log from 3 weeks earlier. Vanessa had explained in simple steps how to set up a temporary relocation of funds for higher yield, had included a list of terms to say if a bank clerk asked questions, and had attached a form with Cedric's name typed in the wrong font where a signature should be. Cedric stared at the curl of the C where his hand would have curved and felt a small tremor in his fingers. "What else?" His voice was low now, steady by effort. Mason clicked to the credit report. "A $30,000 personal loan requested in your name," he said. "It was approved using your social security number and a digital signature that matches the other forged form. A $15,000 credit card application using my number with a false birth year that makes me an adult. Both connected to a mailing address used by Dad in the last month." He paused to let Cedric catch the shape of it. "There is also a second card in your name with a balance that keeps jumping in small amounts like someone is testing it." He pointed to the letters IL beside a list of transactions. Gas pumps, a motel, a big box store, then a long drive, then the same motel again. Cedric looked at the dates. They formed a thin dotted line across the last 10 days like the trail of a person trying to stay ahead of something they could not outrun. "This is theft," Cedric said, naming it so it would stand still. "Yes," Mason said, and his voice did not shake. "That is why I made copies and screenshots and printed everything and also saved digital files with timestamps." I filed fraud alerts for both of us tonight with all three bureaus. I placed a freeze on our credit. I sent identity theft reports with attached evidence to the State Attorney General's office and to the Federal Trade Commission. I also filed complaints with the Banking Commission about Vanessa's access to accounts that are not hers. The printer spit out 3 more pages as if to nod along. Cedric blinked. The list was so organized it almost calmed him. "How did you know to do these steps?" he asked. "I watched Dad," Mason answered simply. "He taught me where to look by telling me what he was hiding without meaning to. When he got secret calls, he closed his laptop fast, but not fast enough. When certain emails came in, he moved his mouse to the same corner. I read about security because I wanted to understand what made the lock and what made the key. YouTube has step-by-step videos. Forums explain how to protect a person from people who think they are smarter than rules. I practiced by helping neighbors fix their Wi-Fi. This is the same work, just bigger." Cedric felt pride push up through his fear like a green thing through cracked ground. And he also felt the other truth, that a boy should not have to know these things at 13. He set the papers down softly. "What happens next?" Mason turned to the spreadsheet again. He added a new row labeled Next Steps and typed as he spoke. "First, more documentation. I will export the bank histories to CSV files and copy them to a flash drive. I will keep the originals read-only so no one can say I changed them. Second, I will assemble a packet for each bank and for the police with a simple timeline and the attachments. Third, I will widen the search on Vanessa because she is the pivot. People do not start at this level. If she did it before, there will be traces. Court records are public. I can search counties where she worked." He glanced up. "I will not contact Dad. He is already running. If I tip him off, he will wipe what he can. I want him to keep thinking he is careful." Cedric nodded slowly. The plan was clear and stark, and it made a kind of hard sense. "Are we safe?" he asked, because the question lived in the walls and would not leave on its own. Mason considered it like a scientist testing a new chemical. "We are safer tonight than we were this morning," he said. "The accounts are frozen. Our credit is locked. I have alerts set up to ping me if anyone tries to use our numbers. The mystery is not whether they did this. They did. The mystery is how far it goes, and that is the part I will solve step by step." He stood and stretched, a sudden reminder that he was still growing, still a boy in a too-big t-shirt. "You should sleep, Grandpa," he added gently. "I will print the last confirmations and then shut this down." Cedric rose and set a hand on the back of the chair. "I am proud of you," he said. Mason gave a small smile that warmed the room more than the lamp. "We are a team," he said. "You kept us together when the house felt too big. I can keep us safe while it feels small." Cedric went back into the hall and pulled the door close to a crack. The keys began again, soft and steady, like rain on a roof that had just been patched, and he walked to his room with the feeling that the night was still dark. But someone had turned on a light and drawn a simple map on the table that said, "Start here." Cedric woke to the smell of coffee and the faint sound of the printer spitting out one last page, and for a moment he forgot the night before, until he rolled over and saw the clock, and felt that quiet, new weight inside the house, the weight of facts. He put on his sweater and walked down the hall and found Mason already dressed for school, sleeves neat, hair combed, standing at the stove with a small pan and a wooden spoon like he had been doing it all his life. Eggs steamed in soft folds, toast leaned against a plate, and 2 glasses of orange juice waited in a line like patient guards. Cedric sat and tried to smile and found that he could. Mason slid the plate to him and then put a manila folder beside the fork. "Eat while you read," the boy said kindly, and his tone made Cedric think of a young doctor who had decided not to be afraid of bad news. The first page was a timeline in simple words and clear dates. Small withdrawals 5 months ago, larger ones 2 months ago, the full drain 3 weeks ago, the loan approvals last week, the credit freeze last night. The next page showed a court docket from Ohio, copied from a public site, with a name at the top that matched the face on the screen from the night before. Vanessa Torres, Premier Investment Services. Terms like embezzlement, unauthorized access, falsified statements, and then case dismissed after restitution agreement and resignation. followed by a date that was not old enough to feel like history. She moved after that, Mason said, tapping a line he had added in pencil. New job at Meridian here. They did not look hard at past records, or if they did, they let the break in the story stand. People like this count on the break. He turned a page, and there was a neat spreadsheet with names in one column and amounts in another and dates bleeding down in a thin gray drip. I searched county records and civil filings, and then I matched names to public social pages to confirm ages and cities, Mason explained. I only included people I could verify. These are not our accounts, Grandpa, but they tell a pattern. She takes small at first, then sends fake statements that show small gains. Then when a client goes to the hospital or loses a spouse or just stops asking, she takes more. Cedric's finger stopped beside the first name. Francis Miller, 82, missing $30,000. The second, Richard Hayes, 74, savings cut in half. He could see faces even without pictures, church coats and checkbook pens, and the careful way older hands open envelopes. He looked up because he needed to breathe. Mason had already stacked the next pieces. A letter he had written in simple language that explained how to check accounts, how to call a bank, what to say, and which government numbers were real. I am going to send packets, Mason said. Anonymous. They will have copies of documents and a clear list of steps and contact numbers. I will not put my name, because if my name is here, then Dad will say I made things up, and the wrong people will listen to him. But the evidence will stand on its own. Cedric nodded and tried to imagine the way the envelopes would feel in the hands of strangers and how a living room in another house would change in 1 minute the way his had changed last night. He took a bite of toast because Mason was watching and the boy needed to see him eat. What about Meridian? He asked. Compliance already has a packet, Mason said. I sent it before I slept. I kept my words short and linked each claim to a piece of proof. I used phrases they search for so it will route fast. Unauthorized access, elder financial exploitation, internal control failure. They will move it because the words push them. He checked his watch like a small executive. I also set up alerts on our credit that ping my email if anyone tries to use our numbers. I used a filter so if the words verification code show up from certain banks, I will see it first. He ate quickly, then slid the folder so Cedric could see the page with next steps typed at the top, each step with a box beside it and times written in the margin. This morning, before school, I will export the CSV files and copy them to a clean flash drive, he said. I will label the drive and put it with the paper copies in a plastic bag so if anyone ever questions chain of custody, we can say what was made when. At lunch, I will stop at the post office and buy a roll of stamps and a few padded envelopes and a small P.O. box number to use as a return so people can send copies of their bank replies if they want, without knowing our home. He paused and looked up at Cedric's face. After school, I will print the victim packets and mail the first 5. I will also create a summary for the police so the detective who gets assigned later does not have to guess where to begin. If they call, you can give them my list. If they ask how I got it, tell the truth. They left their doors open and I wrote down what I saw. Cedric heard the quiet logic in that and felt both proud and heavy. You have a chemistry test, he said, because the world of school still needed to exist in this morning. Mason nodded without drama. Chapter on solutions and rates of reaction, he said. I studied before I slept. I will take it between the CSV and the post office. He smiled for the first time, small and quick. It fits. Today is about reactions anyway. Cedric laughed then, a soft, short sound that loosened something in his chest. He set his fork down and put both hands on the folder like a man taking an oath. What will you tell people when they ask how a 13-year-old did all this? He asked. And he was thinking of the principal, of the detective, of the lawyer the bank would surely send with a tie and a pen and a slow voice. Mason looked straight at him. The truth, he said. That Dad and Vanessa were careless with their security, and I was careful with notes and timestamps. That I used public records and the passwords they reused. That I did not break anything. I watched and wrote. He lifted his glass and drank and set it down exactly on the ring it had already made. But we should be ready for people to be impressed and scared, he added quietly. Sometimes grown-ups do not like it when a kid knows where the wires run. Cedric reached across and squeezed the boy's wrist, a light squeeze, a promise that said, "I am here, and I will be here when the questions come." The house felt less like a mystery and more like a map now, but there were still blank places. Where had the last transfer gone? Who else at the bank had looked away? How many victims lived in silence because shame keeps the mouth shut? He stood and took both plates to the sink and rinsed them while Mason zipped his backpack and slipped the flash drive into a small hard case and tucked it into an inside pocket like a careful courier. At the door, Mason put on his jacket and turned back with that new steady look. "We are going to be okay," he said again, not as comfort, but as a measured result. Cedric opened the door and let him step into the bright, cold morning, and as he watched the boy walk down the porch steps and along the sidewalk toward school, he felt the strange calm of a man who has lost a great deal and then found a thin, strong line back to shore. He closed the door and looked once more at the folder, then at the old phone on the wall. He did not call Craig. He made coffee for the afternoon and set the kettle for later, and put the folder on the highest shelf in the hall closet. And the house, which had seemed too big yesterday, now felt exactly the right size for the work at hand. Cedric moved through the day like a man carrying two baskets, one labeled ordinary and one labeled urgent, and he kept switching them between his hands because the weight of both felt real. After Mason left for school with his backpack zipped and his timeline folded in a side pocket, Cedric washed the breakfast dishes, wiped the counter twice, and stood a long time at the sink, looking at the steam lifting from the mugs, as if the house was still letting go of last night. He put on his coat and walked to the bank with a folder under his arm, not because he thought the walk would fix anything, but because walking kept his thoughts in a line. At the branch, he asked for the branch manager in a voice that was polite and firm, and when a young man in a neat tie led him to a glass-walled office, Cedric laid out the simple parts of the story: his accounts, the strange transfers, the loan he never signed, the freeze already placed. He did not show the screenshots or say how a boy had found bleeding numbers, only that there were confirmations and case numbers, and that he was here to make sure no one moved a dollar without him knowing. The manager listened without fuss and made copies and flagged the accounts and typed notes that used patient words like dispute filed and fraud investigation in progress. And Cedric left with a stack of printouts and a card with a direct line. And the ordinary part of the day let him stand a little straighter. He stopped at the post office and watched an older woman in a blue vest weigh padded envelopes for a man who kept padding his pockets. And he thought of the envelopes that would leave this place later with Mason's careful packets inside, and how those envelopes would change living rooms without setting off alarms. At noon, he ate soup at the diner where the waitress called him Han, and he kept the folder on the seat beside him and his palm on top of it, not to guard it from thieves, but to keep his mind from floating. In the afternoon, he called the Attorney General's consumer line and gave the case numbers. Mason had written on the page with the box labeled contacts, and he wrote down the name of a person who said, "We'll be in touch," like a promise instead of a habit. At 3:30, the door opened, and Mason came in with wind-pink cheeks and the sharp energy of a finished test. And he dropped his backpack, pulled off his coat, and went straight to the printer. He exported the CSV files. He copied them to the clean flash drive. He labeled the bag with a black marker. He sealed the first 5 victim packets with long, careful presses of his palm. And then he asked Cedric to ride with him back to the post office because it felt better to carry the envelopes together. The woman in the vest weighed their stack and handed over a strip of stamps, and Mason stood there and peeled and pressed the stamps with the same care he used when he pressed decals on model cars. In the car, Mason said quietly that the mystery was getting smaller, and Cedric agreed because he could feel it too. Facts moved the walls closer to the truth, and close walls kept people warm. That night, they ate simple food and watched the local news with the sound low. But nothing about Meridian or embezzlement came up, only weather and a school board. Mason worked another hour, then shut down everything cleanly and slept, And Cedric slept too for the first time in 2 nights because the house sounded like a house again, not like a story that was trying to tear itself in half. The next day was a list of small tasks done right. Cedric signed and mailed the dispute forms Mason had queued. He called the credit bureaus to confirm the freezes by voice. He checked the old voicemail on the landline and found nothing but a dentist reminder. Mason went to classes, answered a text from the compliance address with 3 new file names and a thank you. And after school built a plain 1-page summary for the police with a timeline and 4 attachments so no one had to guess which rock to turn over first. On the 3rd morning, the doorbell rang with a delivery. A registered letter from Meridian acknowledging receipt of the evidence and the suspension of an employee pending investigation. Mason set the letter on the table like a piece on a chessboard and said the next moves would be faster now because a bank moved when its own name was on fire. In the afternoon, Cedric sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a pad, working through the month's bills anyway. Mortgage, utilities, a small donation to the church pantry. He was not sure he could afford this month, but would send in halves if he had to. When the phone rang and the caller ID showed a number he knew before his mind admitted it. He let it ring once, then answered. Craig's voice poured through in a rush, jagged at the edges like it had been cut on something sharp. He said everything was falling apart, that his accounts had frozen without warning, that officers had come to the motel to ask questions about identity theft, that Vanessa had been fired, and now there was talk of state banking commission and irregularities and client complaints, that private emails were not private because someone seemed to have them all, that someone was targeting them on purpose, smart and quiet, and that this someone would come for Cedric and Mason next if he didn't do something. Cedric kept his voice level. He could feel the old anger pacing in a cage behind his ribs, but he kept the door closed. He asked where Craig was staying, and Craig, too frightened to lie well, said the Sunset Motel on Route 9, Room 12, paying cash because the cards all said no. Cedric asked why he called now, and Craig said he needed help. He needed money. He needed a ride, maybe. He needed anything that would make the police look somewhere else. He said he had not meant for it to go this far. He had only meant to borrow, that Vanessa had promised a return triple in 6 months, that everything would be fine, and then he'd put it all back, and everyone would forgive him because family did that. Cedric let him speak and did not argue because he watched, out of the corner of his eye, Mason slip into the doorway with the laptop open like a book in his arms. The boy had a small notepad and a pen. He wrote 3 words quickly, "Keep him talking," and slid the note onto the table where Cedric could see it. Cedric nodded just once. Mason sat at the counter and typed, quick and clean. Cedric asked Craig what targeting meant, and Craig said someone had sent a full file to Vanessa's boss, a file with transfers and false statements, and even a list of victims with ages. And Cedric said maybe that was not targeting. Maybe that was truth slipping out of the dark where it had been hiding. Craig's breathing changed on the line. He said this was no joke, that the person behind it had access to passwords, to codes, to recordings, and he sounded like a man in a small room where the walls had moved in the night. Mason lifted another note. Police notified. 5 minutes, and Cedric felt his mouth go dry, but he kept his tone easy, asking Craig about the car, the color, the plate, asking gently if Vanessa was with him now, asking if he had eaten, which made Craig laugh once in a cracked way, and the sound told Cedric that fear had finally outrun arrogance. Through the kitchen window, Cedric saw a cruiser roll silently past the corner and then back again, and Mason's eyes met his, and gave a small nod. And Cedric understood that the boy had called not 911, but the number on the detective email that had arrived that morning with the words received and reviewing and will contact, and that the detective had said, if you hear from him, keep him on the line. Cedric said his son should turn on the television, and when Craig asked why, Cedric said there was something on local news he should see, and Mason slid the laptop to him with a headline already open. Local advisor suspended amid embezzlement probe. Cedric read the words slowly and clearly into the phone, and on the other end there was a silence like a held breath, and then a short, harsh word that Cedric did not repeat. Feet thudded outside a door that was not Cedric's. A calm voice spoke in the background of the call, the kind of voice that uses names like steps. The next sounds were not drama, they were routine. A knock, a pause, a request, the scrape of a chain, the low read of rights that everyone knows from television but does not expect to hear as if spoken to them. Cedric said his son's name once, softly. Craig said Dad in a new voice that was not a boy's and not a man's, only a voice that had lost its place. The line stayed open long enough for Craig to ask if Cedric would come, if there was money somewhere, if there was a way out that was not a cell. Cedric told him to tell the truth and to cooperate and to think about the people he had taken from, including his own child. Then the call ended, not with a click, but with a flat space that filled the room like fog. Mason closed the laptop and came to the table and sat across from Cedric with his hands on the wood and his shoulders straight. He asked if Cedric was okay, and Cedric said he would be, because what had needed to arrive had arrived, and because the mystery that had been knocking was now sitting where everyone could see it, wearing handcuffs and a name. The house grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that belongs to a place that has just told the truth out loud. Cedric stayed at the kitchen table after the call ended, feeling the quiet settle in the way dust settles after something heavy drops, and he kept his hands on the wood so they would not shake. Mason brought over the manila folder and the labeled flash drive and set them in the center like a flag planted on claimed ground. He spoke in a steady voice and said the part with the arrest was finished, and that now came the careful work of recovery. Proof and simple steps that would survive questions. A few minutes later, the phone rang again, not with Craig's number, but with the number from the detective email that had arrived that morning. Cedric answered and listened as the detective introduced himself in a calm, clear tone and explained that officers were on their way to collect initial evidence and to take short statements so they could start paperwork before night court. Cedric said they would be ready. He hung up and turned to watch Mason check each file one more time. The boy set the laptop to read only on the evidence folder, copied it again to a second clean drive for redundancy, printed an index of file names with dates and times, and wrote a simple cover letter that used plain words. Here is what we saw. Here is the order. Here is what belongs to us. Here is what belongs to others. He slipped the drive and the index into a clear zip bag and wrote the date with a black marker across the seal. He taped the bag shut with wide, clear tape and set it beside the folder like a matched pair. When the knock came, it was gentle. 2 officers and the same detective from the phone stood on the porch. They stepped in, looked around the tidy room without judgment, and asked if they could sit at the table. The detective photographed the bag and the folder, wrote down the time, the address, the names, and asked to hear the simple version first. Cedric spoke in chronological order, the way he used to teach his students to write essays. The sound of the suitcase, the open door, the broken frame, the lie, the leaving, the midnight keys, the numbers on paper, the discovery of the loans, the call from the motel, the televised headline, the sound of rights being read. Then the detective asked Mason to explain how he had found what he found. Mason kept his eyes level and his words plain. He said his father used the same password for many things and had saved logins on a family device, that windows were often left signed in, that he saw money moving that should not move, that he copied pages and saved emails before anyone could delete them, that he used public records and court websites to confirm names, that he did not change anything he saw, and that he called banks and bureaus to place legal alerts to protect their identities. The detective did not rush him. He asked if Mason had used tools to break a lock. Mason said no. The door was open, and he wrote down that sentence in his notebook like it mattered. Then he explained what chain of custody meant and why they were taking the bag and the index, and why they would later ask for a full copy of Craig's work laptop if possible. Cedric said the work laptop was gone with Craig, but he could describe what it looked like, and he did. Dull gray, sticker on the lid, 2 dents on the edge. The detective wrote that down too. He left a receipt for the evidence and a card with his direct line and the case number, and said a second detective in the financial crimes unit would contact them to go deeper on bank records and to coordinate with Meridian's compliance. He also said words that were both hard and kind. That fraud with family is common and always cruel, that the law does not see borrowing with a promise to pay back someday, the same way some people pretend to see it. That elder financial exploitation is a serious crime when someone uses age and trust as tools. After the officers left, Cedric stood in the doorway and watched the cruiser pull away into the early dark, and he felt tired in a way that came from living with truths in plain sight. Mason boiled water and made tea for both of them and set the mugs down without a speech. They ate simple soup heated in a saucepan and bread warmed in the oven. They did not talk for a few minutes because silence sometimes does the same work as words when a house is trying to breathe. Then Mason opened the folder again and moved to the next square on his list. He printed the rest of the victim packets, 5 more thick envelopes with timelines, screenshots, and instructions in large type. He checked each name and address twice, slid each set into a padded sleeve, sealed the flap with a long press of his palm, and stacked the envelopes by the door for morning. Cedric watched the care and thought of all the times he had told students to show your work, and he understood that this was that lesson on a larger scale. The phone rang once more. It was the bank manager from the branch Cedric had visited that morning. The manager said he was calling with updates because Cedric had asked for that kind of call. He confirmed that all accounts were frozen and monitoring was active, that a review of internal access showed irregular logins tied to an employee already suspended by the head office, and that a formal letter would follow with reference numbers Cedric could give to investigators. He asked Cedric to prepare a short written statement of impact, dates, original balances, amounts lost, practical effects like missed bills or credit harm. Cedric said he would do that tonight and send it tomorrow. After the call, he sat at the table again with a pen and a yellow pad and wrote in his careful teacher hand. I discovered the missing funds on date. My grandson documented the transfers. I visited the branch. I received the freeze confirmation. I am paying bills late. I fear the college fund is gone. I feel betrayed. He kept the words simple because the truth did not need decoration. While he wrote, Mason worked on a different kind of page. He drew a simple map on printer paper that showed the path of the money as a line with circles. Cedric's savings to Craig's checking, to the new bank, to a holding account with Vanessa as user, then split into smaller lines labeled prepaid cards, cash withdrawals, and one line marked with a question mark that ended at a logo for a digital exchange. He circled that last mark and said it would need a subpoena to open. And he put a sticky note on the map that read, "For detective, ask for exchange records by transaction ID." He also showed Cedric a new find from Craig's open tabs, a small spreadsheet with names and ages and a column called Oversight, which he explained meant how much family watched the accounts. Cedric felt sickness rise and pass like a wave in slow water, because the meaning was clear. They had sorted human beings by who could be fooled the longest. The mystery, which had started as a single hard question, why did my son leave, was now a wider set of linked questions, and yet each answer made the next step clearer. They cleaned the kitchen together, wiped the table, stacked the plates to dry, and locked the doors. Mason checked the window latches and the porch light, and then checked the alerts on his phone. One new ping had come in while they ate, an attempted new line of credit blocked by the freeze. Mason wrote the time on his list and added it to the packet for the detective. He set his alarm for school and then, without being told, turned off the living room light and said good night. Cedric wandered the short hallway to his room and paused in the doorway of the small bedroom that had been Linda's when she first moved in after the wedding. The house had held so many people and versions of people. Now it held a tired man and a boy who worked like a careful grown-up. Cedric lay in the dark and let his breath catch up. He woke before dawn and, over coffee, read his statement one more time and signed it. He and Mason drove to the post office as soon as it opened and mailed the thick stack of envelopes to the names on the spreadsheet and to the legal aid address Mason liked because the staff there answered calls in warm voices. The older woman in the blue vest weighed each envelope and slid them into a canvas bin with a soft thud. They left and drove to the station to drop off the written impact statement and the updated map. The detective met them in the lobby, thanked Mason by name, and said they would move fast now that the arrest had triggered warrants. He also said a simple thing that landed deep. Keep doing ordinary life while we do this. So Cedric and Mason did. They bought groceries. Mason went to second period and turned in his chemistry test. Cedric stopped at the church to sign up to help at the pantry on Saturday because doing one good thing that had nothing to do with crime felt like a way to keep the heart steady. In the afternoon, a short email arrived from Meridian's compliance director. Formal and cool. Employee terminated. Matter referred to authorities. Client review underway. Mason printed it and added it to the stack. That evening, when the mail came through the slot, there was a thin letter for the P.O. box number Mason had rented. Inside was a photocopy of a bank statement with a shaky note from someone named F. Miller. "Is this what you meant? I did not know. Thank you." Cedric read the note twice and set it down with care. The mystery was not gone, but it was smaller and shaped now by dates and names, and balanced by steps that could be checked by other hands. The house felt less like a place where something bad had happened, and more like a place where something good was being built slowly and in order. Cedric looked at his grandson and saw not just a clever boy, but a steady one. And he felt the simple strength that comes when truth sits at the table in the open. And tomorrow has a list. 6 months did not rush. They laid themselves down in neat layers, each with its own small tasks, until the house no longer felt like a place where something terrible had just happened, but like a place where careful work continued every day. Cedric learned a new rhythm. Mornings with coffee and a list, afternoons with errands and phone calls, evenings with dinner and the soft hum of Mason's printer. Ordinary and urgent shared the same table and no longer argued about who sat where. In November, detectives returned with a warrant for records from the digital exchange that showed one of the last lines of money. By December, they had a clear picture of the flow. Savings to Craig's checking, to a new bank with Vanessa as secondary user, to prepaid cards, cash withdrawals, and small buys of cryptocurrency that were cashed out fast. The detective called before Christmas and spoke in the same calm tone as always, but with a finality that felt like a door clicking shut. Charges would include identity theft, wire fraud, and elder financial exploitation. 17 victims were listed by initials. Cooperation from Meridian's compliance had made the paper trail tight. Cedric thanked him and hung up and stood for a long time with his palm on the wall, the way a person thanks a steady building for not falling. In January, after a quiet holiday of soup and a jigsaw puzzle on the card table, Cedric and Mason moved across town. The Victorian, with its long staircase and the room that still remembered Linda's laughter, had become too large for two and too heavy in memory. A modest one-story bungalow with good light and tight windows fit their new life and their smaller budget. Neighbors waved. The mail slot clacked. The heater purred like a cat. Mason set up his desk in a corner of the living room where Cedric could look up from grading substitute papers and see him working. They bought a second-hand couch and a sturdy table that did not wobble when a printer ran. The first week in the new house, the state's attorney's office sent an envelope with the seal stamped at the top. Cedric opened it with a butter knife while Mason watched from the other chair, hands flat on his knees. The letter used careful words: restitution, asset liquidation, pro rata distribution, and a clear number at the bottom. $18,400 to be remitted to C. Bennett, Victims Fund case number referenced. Mason laughed once, not because it was funny, but because relief sometimes comes out as a sound you do not plan. They drove to a credit union Mason had chosen for its security features and opened a new account with two-factor login, text alerts, and a firm clerk who explained how to set up a 529 education plan again when you're ready. They set the check across the counter together and watched it slide into a safe place. Not everything, Cedric said in the parking lot, but enough to breathe. Enough to start again, Mason said, and the sentence felt like a nail driven straight and true. Word came soon after about Craig. The public defender called to confirm that Craig had accepted a plea. There would be no long trial, Only a brief hearing and a sentence. With cooperation, credit, and restitution terms, the range would be 5 years, possibly less with good behavior. The defender spoke gently, as if he knew he was talking to people who had already done a lot of hard listening. Cedric thanked him and declined to make a statement at the hearing. He did not go to the courthouse. He did not want the last picture of his son to be a man in chains between two deputies. He spent that morning at the church hall instead, helping Mrs. Ramirez match a bank letter to the steps on Mason's handouts and showing Mr. Hayes how to call the number on the back of his card instead of the one printed in a scam email. Word had spread quietly among seniors. Once a month, Cedric made tea, set out cookies, and sat with people who were not used to asking for help. He kept his sentences short and his pen handy, and watched fear turn into plans in the space of an hour. Mason's work changed shape too. In February, he showed Cedric a clean website he had built on a free platform, Family Financial Protection Services. The homepage used plain language: keep your money safe, learn to spot scams, recover what you can, and each tab led to something useful: a checklist with boxes to tick, a sample dispute letter with blanks for dates and numbers, a short video where only Mason's hands appeared, demonstrating how to freeze credit on a phone without getting lost. He avoided his face and last name because he was a minor and because the work was not about him. A small line at the bottom read, Founder M. Bennett. Testimonials appeared slowly. My mother did not know money was missing until the packet arrived. We are fixing it now. Thank you for explaining what to say to the bank. You gave us back our courage. Cedric printed them and taped them in a row above the desk, like little windows that looked onto good weather. In March, Mason took an online course through the National Association of Financial Crime Investigators. He studied after homework and before bed, steady as a metronome, reading about red flags and reporting thresholds and the difference between negligence and willful misconduct. He sat the exam on a Saturday morning at the library with a proctor walking the aisles. Cedric waited in the car with a newspaper he did not read and a cup of coffee that went cold. When Mason came out, he did not say anything at first. He just held up the printed pass with a grin that reached his eyes. Cedric whooped out loud and surprised himself. They celebrated with pancakes at the diner, the waitress laughing when Mason ordered a second short stack for the youngest investigator in the county, which made Mason blush and shake his head, but not say no to extra syrup. The police asked for help, too. The detective invited Mason to review a draft of a community scam bulletin before it went to print. Mason circled phrases that would confuse seniors and rewrote them in plain speech. Hang up if someone asks for your code. Banks do not call to ask for it. He suggested a step-by-step diagram of a freeze screen and offered a list of real numbers to call. The department adopted the changes. The community center booked Mason for a free workshop on a Wednesday evening. Cedric sat in the front row, hands folded, and watched his grandson teach with steady voice and clear gestures. If you think something is wrong, Mason said, write down who you spoke to and when. Ask for a reference number. Keep your notes in a folder. Evidence is your friend. People nodded and wrote. After, a line form for questions. Mason answered each one with respect, never in a rush, never making anyone feel slow. Ordinary life kept its place between these moments. Cedric took substitute days at the middle school twice a week and brought his warmth and firm fairness back to classrooms that still smelled of dry erase markers and gym floors. He made simple dinners: chicken and rice, lentil soup, grilled cheese, and Mason washed dishes without being asked. They walked around the block after meals when the weather allowed, talking about small things: a cardinal on the fence, a math problem Mason liked, the neighbor's new dog. The house did the solid work that houses do: kept heat in, kept cold out, held people who were trying to be good. In late April, another envelope arrived from the restitution office with a smaller check and a final accounting: sale of Vanessa's car, jewelry, a seized brokerage account, distribution to victims by percentage, case closeout pending completion of probation terms. Cedric and Mason logged the amount, deposited it, split it, half to the college plan now reopened, half to an emergency fund that sat quiet and strong. Mason's site added 12 families assisted in recovery, then 19, as packets led to actions and actions led to results. He charged nothing to people who had lost money, and a small fee to those who only wanted training. And he put most of that into the college fund. He kept his grades high because he was still 13 with algebra to solve and books to read, and a science fair where he built a simple demonstration of encryption using colored strings and locks that made his teacher smile. The mystery did not disappear. It changed shape. Why did my son leave? Had become, how do we keep other people safe? The first question still lived in Cedric's chest, but it no longer stopped him from making breakfast or showing up for others. He thought of Craig sometimes in the quiet moments. A boy with sticky fingers from popsicles, a teenager laughing too loud at a movie, a new father kissing two fingers and pressing them to a picture frame. And he let those memories sit beside the newer ones without forcing them to fight. On a bright May morning, as Mason packed his backpack for school and tucked a workshop handout inside, Cedric printed a fresh sign for the church bulletin board. Bank statement help, first Saturday, 10/12. Bring a friend. He taped it up and stood back. The paper looked small, but small papers add up. When he came home for lunch, there was an email from the detective. Sentencing complete. Restitution orders entered. Thank you for your assistance. Cedric read it twice and sent a reply that said, simply, thank you for yours. He closed the laptop and stood at the window. The lawn across the street had little white clover flowers in it, and the neighbor's kid was trying to catch a butterfly without hurting it. Cedric felt something inside him settle the way a book settles when you put it back in the right place on a shelf. He turned to find Mason at the table, already working on slides for next week's class. Big letters, step-by-step screenshots, no jargon, a cartoon padlock smiling in the corner because even serious topics can have a little kindness. Cedric brewed tea and set a cup at the boy's elbow. I like who you are becoming, he said. Mason looked up, surprised and pleased. Me too, he said, and bent to his work again, the keys clicking, steady and sure, a sound that now meant building instead of breaking. The last Saturday of May began with a light rain that made the new house smell clean, and the porch boards darken in stripes. And Cedric moved through the morning the way he had learned to move through mornings now. A list on the counter, a kettle on the stove, a set of forms ready for the church hall at 10. He buttered toast and set a cup of tea at Mason's elbow, while the boy adjusted the last slide for a workshop titled Freeze Your Credit in 5 Steps. The printer hummed and spit out handouts. At 9:30, they carried 2 boxes to the trunk and drove the short distance to the church. The hall was already half full. A row of gray heads and a row of young faces from a youth group that had been told to come learn and then go home and show their grandparents. Cedric taped his simple sign to the wall, bank statement help, and set out pens and cookies while Mason tested the projector and clicked through the slides with clean, sure motions. When the room settled, Mason began in the steady voice he had found these months. If something feels wrong, write it down. Names, times, numbers. Ask the bank for a reference number. Keep your notes in a folder. Evidence is your friend. He showed the screen on a phone where a freeze lives. He pointed to the tiny padlock icon by a web address. He said, hang up if anyone asks for a code you did not ask for. People nodded and took notes. After, a line formed, and Mason listened to each person without rushing, making eye contact, writing names on sticky notes so he could say them back right. Cedric took the side table and helped a man with shaky hands read a letter about a new card he had never asked for, and showed him the words, "This is a courtesy." That meant nothing. They stayed until the volunteers needed the room for a baby shower. Back home, they wiped rain off their shoulders in the doorway, and Mason put the boxes under the table for next time. Cedric made soup and warmed rolls, and they ate at the small table that fit the corner like it had been waiting for them all along. The house ticked in the quiet way the new house did, a heater running low, a clock on the shelf, the faint sound of tires on wet pavement outside. After lunch, Mason went to his desk to update the workshop page with 3 new questions people had asked so he could add the answers, and Cedric pulled out a stack of essays from a 7th grade class he had subbed for this week and began to read, red pen ready. He felt calm in the simple, ordinary work of underlining clear sentences and writing good detail in the margin. The phone rang once, and he did not look up. It rang again with a different tone, a long ring that meant the landline, and he reached for it without checking the display. Old habit. When his eyes moved to the caller ID, he saw the letters, Springfield Correctional Facility, call from inmate, and for a second, his hand did not feel like his hand. He set the receiver down on the table beside the essays and let it ring until the machine took it. A recorded voice began, and then a pause, and then a voice he knew in his bones, even when he wished he did not know it. "Dad, it's me." The words were flat, then rushed, then stopped, then started again. "They said you could accept the call. I want to talk." Cedric stood very still and looked across the small room at Mason, who had gone quiet, hands resting on the desk, eyes on his grandfather's face. Cedric reached to press the button that would accept the call and then moved his finger away. The machine beeped, and after a short message, the line clicked off. Cedric breathed once, slow, and the phone rang again. Same display, same choice. He let it ring. The machine took it. "Dad, please," Craig said. "I know I don't deserve." The line cut, and the silence afterwards felt like rain outside a closed window. Mason did not speak. He waited, the way he had learned to wait for people who needed a minute to choose their next sentence. Cedric sat down, placed his palm flat on the table beside the pen, and looked at the essays. He underlined a phrase and wrote "clear image" in the margin because he could do two things at once: hold steady and move forward. The phone did not ring a third time. It gave a small beep that meant a new message waited, and Cedric left it there. He reached for his tea, found it warm enough to drink, and took a sip. When he looked up, Mason had turned back to the laptop and was annotating a PDF from a family in Oregon who had written through the website that morning about a nephew who had helped with bills and left the grandmother's balance strangely thin. Mason typed, "Step 1, gather statements from last 90 days. Step 2, call the number on the back of the card. Ask for fraud department, not customer service. Step 3, use this sample letter to dispute unauthorized charges." He put a checklist at the bottom because people liked boxes they could tick. Cedric listened to the keys and felt the strange mix of pride and sadness that had lived with him for months now, and he could hold both without falling. In the late afternoon, the mail came through the slot. A flyer, a utility bill, and a thin envelope with a state seal. He opened it with the butter knife and read the last line first, because that was the part that told the truth. Sentencing complete. Restitution orders entered. Defendant eligible for early release with conditions. He folded the paper along the old crease marks and set it in the front pocket of the folder labeled case so it would sit with the others. Not because he needed to read it again, but because he liked the way a set of papers sat together when a thing was finished. He wiped the table, stacked the essays, and stood. "Walk?" he asked. Mason nodded and grabbed his jacket. They went around the block in the damp air that smelled like cut grass and wet bark. They waved at a neighbor tying a tarp, and they paused to watch a robin pull a worm from the earth. On the corner, Mason said, "If he calls again, what will you do?" Cedric watched the bird hop and tilt its head. "I will listen when I am ready," he said. "Not because he asks, but because I decide." He wiped a raindrop off his glasses. Forgiveness is not a door you can kick open from the outside. Mason nodded, not pushing. "Some people will say you should pick up because family," he added. Cedric smiled a little. "Family is not a word you can use to cancel harm," he said. "Family is a job. You did the job." When they came back, Cedric made grilled cheese, and Mason cut apples into even slices and put them on the plates like sunbursts. They ate on the couch and watched a nature show with the sound low. The phone stayed quiet until after dishes. Then it beeped with a new email, and Mason opened it. A short note from F. Miller read, "Bank reversed charges. They said the packet helped. Thank you." Mason forwarded it to the detective with a line, "Outcome update," and put a copy in the results folder on the site. Cedric printed the email and taped it to the wall above the desk next to the other small rectangles that had become their weather map. It was not a wall of trophies. It was a wall of reminders that work mattered. At 9, Mason took a call in the bedroom with the door half open and said, "This is M. Bennett, in the professional voice he used for cases now. Cedric heard him explain steps to an aunt who sounded scared and tired from crying, and when the call ended, Mason came out and sat down on the rug. "They will be okay," he said. "She has a cousin who can drive her to the bank tomorrow." Cedric rubbed the back of the boy's neck once, a small gesture that had become their habit, and said, "Good." The phone flashed a light again, one voicemail. Cedric pressed play and listened to his son's voice fill the room in a low, careful rhythm. "Dad, I heard you moved. I hope the place is warm. I'm working in the library here, shelving books. It's quiet." A pause. "I'm sorry. I know that's small. I know sorry is not a payment. I know I took more than money. I'm trying to do the classes they have. I don't know what I'm asking you for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just that you heard me." The message ended. Cedric sat still until the light stopped blinking. He did not erase it. He did not call back. He put the phone down and turned off the lamp. In the dark, the new house held them the way good houses do, plain and steady. In bed, Cedric thought of Craig at 13, a boy with skinned knees and a laugh bigger than his body. And he let that picture sit beside the man in the message without making them fight. In the next room, Mason's keyboard started again, softer now, as he finished an email to the Oregon family with a list of local legal aid numbers. The keys made a sound Cedric had come to love. Not a frantic tapping, but a measured, patient clicking that meant someone was building steps for someone else to climb. He closed his eyes and slept. In the morning, he would make coffee and cut toast and print a new sign for the church board. "First Saturday, bring your statements. We'll sit together." He would check the mail, file the last letter, and answer 2 calls. One from a man in town with a strange charge, one from a neighbor who had found a link with a too-good promise. He would not pick up if the prison called before he was ready. He would keep doing ordinary life while the world did what it does. And when people asked how the headline had turned into this quiet house and this steady boy, he would tell the simple version, in order. His son emptied the accounts and vanished with a woman who stole. His grandson said, "Grandpa, I'll handle this." And then he did. The police came, the bank moved, the courts did their work. And after the storm, they kept their door open for anyone else walking in the rain.